portrait of Jimmy Carter that was done by Andy Warhol. The portrait was based off of a series of photographs that Andy Warhol took of Jimmy Carter prior to his 1976 election. And it's actually signed by Jimmy Carter himself. There were, I think, about 50 of this particular portrait distributed, and some of them were signed by Jimmy Carter. And there was another portrait that Andy Warhol produced for Jimmy Carter's 1976 election, and some of those are signed by Jimmy Carter as well. And then Andy Warhol actually, he did a third portrait, but it was used for his inauguration. The portrait, Andy Warhol intensified the colors in the portrait to, I think, intensify Jimmy Carter's expression, because he's kind of got like a frowning expression on his face. And Jimmy Carter actually said that the reason why he was so, he looked so down in the picture was because he was losing some of his primary votes. The location of the portrait is kind of an odd location, I would think, because, well, for one thing, it was near the new arrivals portraits, and the portraits that are kind of next to him don't really, I don't think, really have anything to do with Jimmy Carter himself at all. Um, it's on the first floor. It does cause a lot of traffic. I I kind of took notice that most people were actually stopping to look at the Jimmy Carter piece more than any of the other pieces on the wall. And what I found was interesting was that on the wall of this portrait was it was all men except for one woman, and I thought that that was kind of interesting. And the Jimmy Carter piece is the biggest piece out of anybody else in that wall, and it's right smack in the middle. This wasn't the only Andy Warhol piece in the museum. There were two other pieces. There was a portrait that Andy Warhol did of Ted Kennedy that was actually right down the hall from the Jimmy Carter portrait, right across from the Obama Hope portrait. And then on the third floor, there's the famous Marilyn Monroe portrait. Andy Warhol, I think he uses a particular style with all of his pieces. They're kind of wacky and out there and unique. The three that were in the portrait gallery were definitely, I think, very out there. Kind of stood out from some of the other portraits. He uses a lot of bright colors in all of his pieces, except for, I think, the Ted Kennedy piece. I think that one was a little bit more downplayed than most of Andy Warhol pieces. The Ted Kennedy one, I don't think you can really see the picture that I took of it. I don't think it's clear enough, but all it is just a black and white picture, and then some glitter, like red and blue glitter thrown on to his face. I don't know. It's not as crazy as all of his other portraits, I don't think. But yeah, the Jimmy Carter portrait, that wasn't the only portrait of Jimmy Carter in the National Portrait Gallery. There were two other portraits of him in the presidential part of the gallery, the Gallery of Presidents. There was one giant full-length portrait of Jimmy Carter. And then right next to it there was a really like tiny portrait in this little box right next to it. I think that there are a lot of reasons why the National Portrait Gallery um, includes Jimmy Carter. One being that he is an iconic American, has been for many years, still is today. A lot of people look up to him for what he did as president. He did a lot when he was president, from 1977 to 1981. He did things like the Panama Canal treaties and the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And a lot of people still look up to him for what he does today. While he was president, he was huge on human rights, and he's still huge on human rights today. And he works with this organization called Habitat for Humanity. And Habitat for Humanity is a non-profit organization that builds houses and builds shelters, not just in the United States, but throughout the entire world. And Jimmy Carter actually has his own group with Habitat for Humanity called the Jimmy Carter Project. And what they do is once a week, every year, Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind Carter and the Jimmy Carter Project, they'll pick a place somewhere somewhere in the world, and they'll go out and volunteer and help build a shelter or build a house. I don't really think that the Andy Warhol Jimmy Carter portrait really represents any of the accomplishments that Jimmy Carter has done. But what I do think the portrait represents is the future of this country during that time period. Those portraits were used while Jimmy Carter was campaigning to become president. So I think that that's really the only thing that portrait has to do with is his campaign and the future of America during that time.